Hello and welcome to another episode of DDK Talks Esports. Today we'll be talking about some of the recent things in the news. It's another guest list episode, but that's fine. I think last week's one went fairly well. So today we'll be talking about get right, talking about talent. And I think this is a really interesting topic. And for those of you that have listened to some of my content, you'll know that these are ideas that I really like to talk about. And I think I agree and disagree with the statement that he made, and that's in the headline on HLTV. He stated, "I want everyone to know that even if they aren't talented, they can work hard and achieve good results." And I think it's an interesting statement because in some senses, it's very idealistic. It's the idea that it doesn't matter who you are, if you put the work in, you will succeed. And I think, in large part, I do agree with this. But I think if we want to be realistic, I think that we have to understand really what talent is and what skill sets are required to be good. And I think it's so much more than even what just goes into the game. For example, the very definition of talent is simply natural aptitude or skill. And so natural aptitude, that can come in many different forms when we're talking about being a professional player in any sport or esport. When we're looking at some of the factors that exist outside of the game, some people are very good when it comes to understanding how to navigate their social environment to get the best out of a situation. Because sometimes you can be incredibly talented, but if you, of course, are not, let's say, the best person to play with, you have horrible communication or you don't communicate yourself well in general, you're not going to be very liked. And this is going to have some very hard to see knock-on effects because people are not going to want to play with you. And if you have too many people in one place with horrible communication, and sometimes this could even be defined as perhaps toxic, you can kind of poison the well, as it were. You can have a situation where an entire culture could be sort of corrupted, and we talk about that pretty often when we look at certain scenes. And actually, funnily enough, the UK scene has been one of the scenes that has been criticized for struggling with this. And in the past, we had a lot of calls or accusations, I should say, towards some of the North American parts of the community when it came to this as well, that perhaps there was issues with work ethic. And the idea of that is an interesting one as well as it pertains to what Get Right said, because you can have these non-in-game factors, non-in-game skill sets that can massively impact your ability to perform or to be and reach a potential that is, let's say, to have you on a professional level, which is what Get Right is, I think, is the context of what Get Right is saying when he says work hard and achieve good results. I think the context is about being that top 0.5% where you're able to play professionally and perhaps make a living from this game. So if we think about those environmental factors, I do think that there is, that is something that needs to be considered. And this is something that he does mention in the interview. He does state that for some people, he understands it to be difficult as they may not have a very understanding situation from their family or friends or girlfriend, or it might just be, perhaps there's socioeconomic difficulties that may pressure you into wanting to, instead of being able to make the easy choice of just playing the game without having to consider money, instead you have to think, okay, I got to get myself a job, or I got to split my time that way. And we know that, not being able to put in those hours, for some people, they might not need as many hours as others, but for a lot of people, they're going to need probably a lot of hours. And that's specifically what we're really talking about here with this statement is obviously, like, working hard means that you are having to put in the time. There's no way around that. So whilst I think Get Right statement is correct, I think that it can be also difficult because it does also require a level of self-awareness to understand where your skill sets actually lie, so you can work with them and understand how to make informed judgments as to how to direct your development. And directing your development, that's also another meta concept, a concept that exists outside of the game. It's your ability to manage your development and your performance. Now, if you want to go even further towards that thought, then you also have this idea of motivation, which is something that he mentions as well. Like how does he recapture his own motivation? Progress is one of the most motivating factors. So if you're somebody that repeatedly runs into walls and you're someone that you don't find that mentor that helps to push you and guide you in the right direction, or perhaps you're in one of those more horrible cultures, or perhaps you're someone with more pressure coming from your environment that makes it more difficult to put in the time that you want and to really focus on those improvements. If you have these obstacles to progress, it's very difficult to maintain that motivation, because generally speaking, we need to feel something like something is going well. We need some marker that we're doing well. And this is something that when we're looking at people, when, let's say you're playing matchmaking, for example, everybody's concerned with that metric because you're investing time into this discipline. And for a lot of people that, let's say, they don't understand how to really track and understand what a metric looks like for actual improvement, they'll take what is the most obvious thing that they can see. For example, kills. Like, what does the scoreboard tell you? And they'll judge themselves based on the scoreboard, which, of course, any informed person in Counter-Strike and perhaps any sort of thinking individual could, really understand that that's not a metric for performance in one, a team game, and two, just generally it's too simplistic when considering the complexities of the nature of the game. So there's so many different factors when it comes to how people are able to have the right qualities in the right place in lieu of what I think is being referred to in this statement as talent, which is the ability to have great mechanical skill, for example, or great raw skill, or like an aptitude for developing good mechanics. Being able to, some people are able to just sit down at a computer and they're able to find just a good posture that works for them. They're able to find the right shape and sensitivity. That, it may have been the case that at some point, because we all need to experiment, that you'll have, a pro player or a now pro player, when he was young and developing and up and coming, copying other pros and switching his sensitivities, and maybe they would have struggled with some of these aspects. But at some point, you find your style and you find what works for you, and you don't have to consistently go back and ask those questions again. Like, you understand what works for you to have good mechanics. And for some people, that is a really big struggle. And so that's, one of the things I think that Geray might be talking about when it comes to, talent and natural aptitude. Or, it could be something to do with the more cerebral or, intellectual aspects of the game, which require your ability to understand and think abstractly and project upon information and patterns that you're constantly taking in, to have game sense and to be able to read the next move from your opponents. Now, some players aren't so good at that, but what they're able to do is they're able to mitigate that deficiency by perhaps good guidance, or, as I mentioned, the mentor before, or understanding those limitations to then define much more as to what kind of player they're going to become. And then as they experience success through picking the right path there, they may later on, as they progress, it may be into semi-pro to professional, they may continue to develop by being exposed to the right people and environments to then be able to understand eventually, hey, this thing that I was quite slow on, it didn't really matter because I was able to focus on the right strengths to get there in the end. So there are lots of different factors when it comes to figuring out exactly how to direct your improvement, and the psychological elements as well, which we touched upon with the idea of motivation, is one of the very key and core aspects. And one of the problems, and that I highlighted previously as well, is that there are lots of things that can serve to really put your motivation down, or to maybe perhaps affect you negatively, or generate a negative emotional relationship between yourself and the game. And that's also a place where you're going to have performances that are either inconsistent or generally negative, or it's just going to affect the speed of your development, which will in turn have that impact. So in reality, I think that Getray's statement is that hard work definitely pays off, and you can work through a lot of issues that I was mentioning, a lot of these obstacles that I've highlighted. But in some cases, it's much more unrealistic for certain individuals to be able to overcome. So I think this is a really interesting idea, because it's actually very complicated to unpack it all. Because if we talk about what are the natural aptitudes, well, one of the reasons why we love watching Counter-Strike and why watching one player, if you just pull up any professional player on a top 8 team, you can start listing off all the things that makes that individual different than other people that pour their life and soul into the game, that tells you that the very fact that there is that difference from player to player and how they interpret the game, that tells you just the wealth of diversity in skill sets that are required to play the game. So I think that, it's too easy, and we like to be binary when we think about the idea of talent, and we say sometimes to ourselves, this guy is talented or this guy is not talented. But it's not really binary. It is absolutely more of a spectrum that we're looking at, that you can chop into all sorts of different categories. And so it's one of those things where it's interesting to think about. None of us, I wouldn't really ever say differently than you should try to work hard and see if things can click for you. But I do think that sometimes we have to be careful with these statements, as to not go too overboard. And I think the right kind of person will, a statement like that will resonate with the right kind of person. I feel like deep down we all pretty much understand what our passions are or should be, and where we want to place that hard work. And some people will see something in the game, and they'll see something in the achievements that they could get through hard work in the game and developing themselves in that discipline that will pay off. And that's really, I think, what it all comes down to is what are you looking for when it comes to the achievements? And, working hard for that is always valuable, because you'll always learn something, because you'll always face a challenge. And if you meet that challenge and try to work through it, you'll always get some form of a result. And I do think that just because so many people, if we look at maybe the entire population of the game, I think it is fair to say that even in a very competitive environment, you can mitigate a lot of natural weaknesses by putting the time in and taking yourself very seriously and picking the right models to follow. And so, and by this I mean you want to pick players like Get Right. You want to pick players to follow like ZipX, or who are where you can look at him and you can easily understand not only what he's doing and his strengths in the game, and by understanding someone's strengths, you can clearly see then how they look at the game, because someone's the way that someone will play and the decisions that they'll make will often be based around their strengths, and that means that their style of play is their perspective of how they look at the game. So you can start to understand and learn more and more by studying these people. And I think that's really the key for anyone. If let's say you are someone that really thinks, I'm resonating with Get Right's statement here that because I don't feel talented, but I want to believe that I can work hard and achieve good results. When I'm on the server, I look around me and I'm like, I'm not the best fragger. I don't have the best game sense, and this is the interesting thing. I think this is the romance of this, in a sense, the poetry to it, that even if you are that person, and I think to an extent, I think Get Right has been experiencing that, and I think he kind of mentions it in this interview. He says, I don't feel special anymore. And he was on top of the world at one point. He's going to be looking around himself and finding all these sources of inspiration in players. He even mentions, people like Device and Simple, how he really respects their hard work and he looks up to them. And I think this is one of the best ways that you can mitigate, if you think you have a lack of talent, that lack of talent. Because the inspiration is, I think, really it's a couple things. It's one, you wanting to see a result that you want. You're aspiring to achieve something that you just really want it for some reason. And you don't, there can be for so many different reasons. It doesn't have to be something very profound, but it can be for whatever reason. And if you see someone that's able to do those things, it's amazing the journey you can sort of go on by following that person and trying to sort of emulate them, sort of the fake it till you make it motto, and just seeing where that takes you and just letting the journey sort of become itself in that way. So if you are able to inspire yourself to that degree, I think that carries the motivation through a lot of hardships that we talked about previously. Because I think that he kind of hits the nail on the head there when we have all this talk of motivation. Because obviously, if you're not able to, you can't put the hard work in without understanding intrinsically that time is valuable, that taking all that time away from everything else is valuable. So this is this has been a discussion around the idea of what talent is, and because I wanted to sort of talk about the fact that it is not as binary as we like to say, and that it is so many different things, and that even if you feel like you don't have any talent, you actually most certainly do have some aptitude for some of the many skill sets within the game. And one of the journeys is finding what the weaknesses are, which is very exhilarating to find those things and to find out, how to fix those. But then also, what is also equally as exhilarating is to surprise yourself when you realize that as you develop yourself, you find that you have aptitudes that you didn't realize along that path. And if you sort of channel those things through that motivation by like finding the right inspiration to keep you going, even if you have like to mitigate some of these horrible environmental impacts, whether it be socioeconomic, whether it be cultural, whether it be just through the culture, within your scene that you're playing within, or whatever it might be. That's I think to me one of the most special messages here, and I've always sort of lived by this philosophy as well, despite this tangent maybe alluding to the fact that I disagree with some of it. But ultimately I think that sometimes very complex things, you can try to unpack them like this and you can try to be all fancy, but in reality, I think there's never, if you were ever inspired enough to put the hard work in, whether or not you achieve good results, you're going to achieve something, and it's going to teach you something about yourself, and it's going to further inform and inflame your passion, or it's going to tell you that your passion is elsewhere. So that means that you're getting something very valuable regardless. So I love that. I love that that's something that Get Right was talking about, and I love that how he embodies this. And he's one of the best pros when it comes to being a role model. And he's a very nice guy as well to talk to. And if you ever get the chance to, he's one of those people you can just walk up to him and just say hi. And I think he even mentions this actually in the interview. That truly is, that's very true. Like I've seen Gerrit at many events, and he's that kind of guy. He'll just walk into a room. He doesn't even necessarily need to know anybody, but he's just automatically comfortable with himself, and he knows what he wants and he works for it. So if you're going to pick a role model or someone to inspire you, Gerrit's definitely one of those people. So that does it for this today's podcast. I'll endeavor to get a guest on for the next one. But following this, following the last one, I was pleased to see that there was some good feedback from it. So I might start producing more per week. If I already have like a podcast lined up, I can always fall back on being able to do this, to do this and throw it out there on top of that, or vice versa. So I'm still feeling it out, but if people keep responding well to these kinds of solo talks, then I'll keep delivering them. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it or got something valuable from it. If you want to leave me any feedback, I would really like to see that. And remember to share it with anyone that you may think will find it interesting. And also remember to, if you're listening to this on YouTube or something like that, if you are someone that's ever uses podcast apps, it's really helpful to me if you subscribe and like through one of the various podcast apps, whether it's iOS or whether it's on Android. It's on many of them, and of course Spotify as well. So cheers.